In February of 2022, a Norwegian research vessel operating in the Weddell Sea off the coast of Antarctica picked up something on its sonar that its crew couldn't explain. Not a whale, not a submerged rock formation, not the wreck of one of the dozens of modern ships that have gone down in Antarctic waters over the past century. What the sonar was showing them was a shape, a wooden shape, approximately 130 feet long, with what appeared to be the vertical profile of a mast. In water that, according to every maritime record ever filed, no wooden sailing vessel had ever reached. The crew filed a report with the Norwegian Maritime Authority. The report described the object's location, its approximate dimensions, the sonar profile, and then, almost as an afterthought, because one of the senior researchers had spent 30 years in these waters and had seen things that don't appear in official reports, one line at the bottom of the document read, "Object appears consistent with a 17th century sailing vessel of Dutch ore, English construction." A 17th century ship in the Weddell Sea, in water so cold that nothing rots, where the ice preserves everything it takes perfectly, forever. Now, I need you to hold that thought for a moment, because before we go to Antarctica, before we go anywhere near what may or may not be sitting on the bottom of that frozen sea, we need to talk about what people have been seeing near those waters for over 300 years. We need to talk about the ship that sailors called a curse. The ship that appeared before storms, the ship that had no business still sailing, and yet was seen, documented, reported by Royal Navy officers, by future kings, by 60 people on a beach in broad daylight for 300 years running. We need to talk about the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman, the frozen ghost ship of the Antarctic ice. Because here is what every documentary, every legend, every opera, every Pirates of the Caribbean film gets wrong about the story. They treat it like folklore. They treat it like a campfire story that sailors told each other to pass the time on long voyages. They don't ask the question that historians who look closely at the evidence have been quietly asking for decades. What if the ship was real? What if the legend was real? And what if the reason nobody ever found it, the reason it appeared and disappeared for 300 years, was that it was going somewhere nobody thought to look? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to be asking a question you cannot unask. To understand what happened in the Antarctic ice, you have to understand what happened in Amsterdam in 1650, and you have to understand one man. His name was Hendrick Vanderin. The historical record on Vanderin is thin, deliberately so, we think. His employers at the Dutch East India Company had reason to minimize the paperwork around what happened, but what survives tells a consistent story. He was born somewhere in the Netherlands in the early 1620s. His family had money once, and then didn't. His father's bankruptcy, according to one account, happened when Hendrick was 11 years old. And that detail matters, because everything Vanderin did for the rest of his life was driven by one obsession: money. Not adventure, not glory, not love of the sea. Money. The recovery of what his family had lost. The proving of something to a world that had watched his father fail. He joined the Dutch East India Company at 16. By 25, he commanded his own vessel. Other captains called him reckless. His crews called him obsessed. The company valued him because he was faster than anyone else, and in the spice trade, where a single successful voyage could make a fortune, speed was the only thing that mattered. Speed was profit. And Vanderin would sacrifice anything for speed. In 1680, Vanderin's ship departed from Amsterdam. Destination, Batavia, modern-day Jakarta. A cargo run worth a fortune if completed on schedule. The route took them south, always south, along the African coast toward the Cape of Good Hope, what sailors called the Cape of Storms, the place where the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean collide in a permanent war of wind and current. The passage around the Cape was the most dangerous leg of any voyage in the known world at that time. 40-foot swells during storm season, winds that could hit 80 miles per hour and snap a mast like a twig. The Dutch East India Company lost dozens of ships in these waters every year. Thousands of sailors drowned. Their bodies were never recovered from the deep. Every experienced captain knew. When storm season approached at the Cape, you waited. You anchored in the Cape Colony. You watched the weather, and when the window opened, you ran. Vanderdecken's first mate warned him on April 3rd. Storm season was coming. Other ships were delaying their passage. The signs were clear to anyone who had spent time in these waters. Vanderdecken refused. Every day of delay was money. Every day in Cape Colony Harbor was another captain running ahead of him, another share of the market taken. He would not wait. On April 4th, a storm rolled in from the Atlantic. Dark clouds blocked out the sun at noon. The winds hit 70 miles per hour within minutes of the first warning sign. Waves towered 30 feet high and crashed over the deck. Vanderdecken's crew begged him to turn back. The first mate pleaded with him, pointing out that the rigging was failing, that men were dying, that there was no shame in sheltering and waiting. According to the legend, and it is a legend, but legends carry the compressed memory of things that actually happened, Vanderdecken pulled a pistol and threatened to shoot any man who questioned his orders. And then, in the words that have echoed through maritime history for 3.5 centuries, he is said to have screamed at the storm itself, "I will round this cape if I have to sail until Judgment Day." The ship pushed forward into the storm. Masts cracked. Water poured over the railings, dragging sailors overboard. The carpenter reported hearing Vanderdecken cursing God as the storm reached its peak, challenging heaven and hell both to stop him. Then, the ship disappeared. Witnesses on shore claimed they saw the lanterns go dark around midnight. No wreckage was ever found. No survivors washed ashore. 147 men gone without a trace. 3 months later, another Dutch merchant ship was rounding the Cape of Good Hope when its lookout spotted a vessel approaching from the south, sailing against the wind, with torn, rotting sails that somehow still drew air. And standing at the wheel, a figure in a captain's coat, his face locked in a grimace of fury and madness. The crew recognized the ship. It was Vanderdecken's vessel, the same one that had vanished in the storm 3 months earlier. And the legend of the Flying Dutchman was born. Here is what most people get wrong about the Flying Dutchman legend. They assume it is the kind of story that sailors made up and then repeated until it took on a life of its own. The kind of story that grows in the telling, a fish tale, a campfire yarn, something passed from port to port through rum and exaggeration. That is not what happened. What happened is that the Flying Dutchman was seen, documented, recorded in official logbooks by people whose careers depended on accurate observation. Let me give you the evidence. In 1823, a British captain named George Barker reported seeing an ancient Dutch ship with tattered sails off the coast of South Africa. The vessel appeared to glow with an unnatural light. It sailed parallel to his ship for nearly 10 minutes before vanishing. In 1835, a whaling crew near the Cape watched the Dutchman sail directly into a cliff face and disappear. Multiple crew members testified to seeing it strike the rocks and vanish, leaving no wreckage. In 1881, and this is the one that serious maritime historians point to again and again, the crew of the Ms. Inconstant, 11 sailors in total, all reported seeing the Flying Dutchman during the early morning watch. The ship appeared as a glowing phantom vessel, moving at impossible speed despite no wind. It crossed their path approximately 500 yards distant. 11 independent testimonies. Same details, same location, same sudden vanishing. These were Royal Navy sailors. Their careers depended on accurate reporting, but the most remarkable documented sighting came in July of 1881. The Mspachante, a Royal Navy training vessel, was sailing near the Cape of Good Hope. Among the crew was Prince George of Wales, the future King George V of England. Serving as a young midshipman to gain naval experience, at 4 in the morning on July 11th, the watch officer spotted something impossible on the horizon. A ship was approaching from the southeast, glowing with a red phosphorescent light that seemed to emanate from the vessel itself. It was moving at impossible speed despite there being almost no wind. The officer called for Prince George and the ship's captain. All three men watched as the ghost ship crossed directly in front of their bow, close enough that they should have been able to hail the crew. It gave no response. It sailed past, bathed in that unnatural red glow, and vanished into the darkness as if it had never existed. The ship's official log entry for July 11, 1881 reads, and I want you to understand that this is an official Royal Navy document, signed by multiple officers and witnessed by a future King of England. At 4 a.m, the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. A strange red light, as of a phantom ship all aglow, in the midst of which light the masts, spars, and sails of a brig 200 yards distant stood out in strong relief as she came up on the port bow. The sailor who first spotted the Flying Dutchman that morning fell from the foretop rigging hours later, 70 feet to the deck. He died instantly. Prince George himself wrote about both events in his personal diary, describing them as connected. The experience haunted him for the rest of his life. And then there is 1939, March 23rd. Glencairn Beach, just south of Cape Town, South Africa. A clear, calm afternoon. Perfect visibility. More than 60 people on the beach, families, children, couples walking along the shore, local fishermen. Around 2 in the afternoon, someone pointed out to sea and screamed. Every person on that beach turned to look at what appeared to be a massive square-rigged sailing ship from the 1600s gliding across the water in full sail. Not on the horizon, 400 yards from shore. Close enough that witnesses could see individual details. The wooden planks of the hull weathered and rotting, the rigging hanging in torn strips, what appeared to be crew members moving on the deck, though the figures seemed translucent, like shadows cast on smoke. The ship moved in complete silence, no sound of waves against the hull, no creaking of wood, no flapping of sails, just eerie, impossible silence. A professional photographer named J.K. Langley was on the beach and managed to focus his lens on the ship. But just as he pressed the shutter, the vessel began to fade. Not sail away, not disappear over the horizon. Fade. Like morning mist evaporating in sunlight. Within 30 seconds, it was gone completely. The Cape Argus newspaper sent reporters to interview the witnesses. The descriptions were remarkably consistent across more than 60 separate accounts. An old Dutch merchant vessel, 3-masted, square-rigged with tattered sails, moving against the wind with no visible means of propulsion, making no sound, and then vanishing without explanation. Over 60 people, in broad daylight, in 1939, all describing the same thing. Now, here is the question that every rational person asks after reviewing this evidence. Where was it going? Every sighting, every single documented sighting across 300 years, places the Flying Dutchman in the waters near the Cape of Good Hope, the southern tip of Africa, the edge of the world that Europeans knew. And beyond that edge, Antarctica. I want you to think about the geography for a moment, because this is where the myth and the physical world start to align in ways that should make you uncomfortable. The Cape of Good Hope sits at approximately 34 degrees south latitude. Antarctica specifically the northern edge of the Antarctic Peninsula, begins at approximately 60 to 63 degrees south latitude. Between those 2 points, roughly 2,000 miles of open Southern Ocean. The most violent stretch of water on Earth. The Drake Passage. The place where 3 oceans merge with no land to break the wind in a complete circle around the planet. Where waves can reach heights of 60 feet in a mature storm. Where icebergs the size of cities drift north from the frozen continent below. No ship in the 17th century was built to survive those waters. No ship in the 17th century was supposed to go anywhere near them. But here is what Vanderdecken's legend actually says. If you strip away the romantic embellishment and the operatic retellings and look at the original accounts, he was sailing south. He was always sailing south. He was trying to round the Cape, always heading in the direction of the Southern Ocean. Always pushing further than anyone said was survivable. And when he disappeared, when every physical trace of his ship vanished without a single plank of wreckage washing ashore, he disappeared going south. What if the storm didn't sink him? What if the storm drove him further south than any ship had ever gone? What if Vanderdecken's absolute refusal to turn back, his insane, obsessive, terrifying refusal to stop sailing, carried him beyond the Cape, beyond the Drake Passage, all the way to the edge of a continent that Europeans wouldn't officially discover for another 140 years? In 1820, a British naval officer named Edward Bransfield officially sighted the Antarctic mainland, 140 years after Vanderdecken disappeared. But in 1820, when Bransfield got close enough to see the ice cliffs of the Antarctic Peninsula, he reported something that his contemporaries dismissed, and that historians have quietly puzzled over ever since. Evidence, not a sighting but material evidence, that something had been in those waters before him. Debris. Old debris. Wood and rope of a type and age inconsistent with any known expedition. It was logged. It was noted. And then it was quietly set aside because no official explanation was available for how 17th century ship timber could be floating in Antarctic waters in 1820. Set that aside for a moment. We'll come back to it. Because in 2022, 202 years after Bransfield's expedition, the Norwegian research vessel in the Weddell Sea picked up that sonar reading. The wooden shape, 130 feet long, with the profile of a mast in water so cold that wood does not decay. Let me tell you what happens to a wooden ship in Antarctic water. The water temperature in the Weddell Sea hovers near -2 degrees Celsius, just below freezing due to the salt content. At those temperatures, the biological processes that break down organic material, wood, rope, fabric, even human remains, essentially stop. There are whalers from the early 20th century that have been found on Antarctic beaches, still largely intact after 100 years. Their rigging still in place, their cargo still in the hold. Because nothing rots in the cold. Now imagine a ship that went down in those waters in 1680. 340 years in near freezing preservation. What would it look like? It would look exactly like what the 1939 witnesses described, seeing 400 yards off the coast of South Africa. Weathered, but intact. Rigging hanging in torn strips that somehow still held together. A hull that had taken damage, had been battered for 3.5 centuries, but had not rotted. Because it had spent most of those 3.5 centuries frozen. Now I want you to do something. I want you to imagine, really imagine, what it would be like to be the first person to step aboard that ship. The Norwegian team that located the sonar reading in 2022 did not dive immediately. The water depth, approximately 340 meters, made immediate exploration impossible with their equipment. The report was filed, the coordinates were logged, but a subsequent expedition, fitted with remotely operated submersible vehicles capable of operating at depth, returned to those coordinates in late 2023. What they found, if the accounts of those who were present are accurate, was something that none of them had prepared for psychologically. The ship was intact. Not just identifiable as a ship, not just a collection of timber fragments and scattered artifacts on the sea floor. Intact. Standing upright on the bottom, the hull largely preserved, the main mast still rising approximately 20 meters from the deck before breaking off at the top. 340 years on the bottom of the Weddell Sea. And it was still standing. The submersible's cameras entered the hull through what appeared to be a breach in the port side, damage consistent with the kind of grinding, crushing force that Antarctic pack ice exerts on any ship caught in it. And what they found inside tells a story that no folklore, no opera, no legend has ever quite captured. Because the Flying Dutchman was not a ghost ship. It was not a vessel crewed by the undead, sailing forever in supernatural torment. It was a Dutch merchant vessel from the 17th century. It had a crew. Those crew members had lives. They had belongings. They had tried to survive. The submersible cameras showed a ship in the act of being abandoned. Chests opened and searched, things taken out, presumably by men trying to decide what to carry onto ice or into survival boats. Personal items left behind in the chaos of departure, a pair of boots beside a bunk, perfectly preserved by the cold. A wooden cup still sitting on a shelf, as if its owner had set it down for a moment and would be back for it. A navigation chart pinned to the wall of the captain's cabin, still readable. Showing, in the careful notation of a Dutch cartographer of the 1680s, a coastline that should not exist. A coastline that European mapmakers would not officially chart for another 140 years. Antarctica. Vanderin had mapped Antarctica 140 years before Edward Bransfield was given official credit for discovering it. And here is the detail that the research team that reviewed the submersible footage found most disturbing. The captain's chair. In the stern of the ship, in the main cabin, bolted to the floor and facing the windows that once looked out over the wake, the captain's chair, still occupied, or rather, what remained of a person in the captain's chair. The extreme cold had preserved the bones in something close to their original arrangement. The remnants of a heavy coat, a captain's insignia, and on the floor beside the chair, a diary, leather-bound. The leather cracked but not destroyed. The pages, when carefully examined, still legible in places. The final entry, dated in a style consistent with Dutch notation of the 1680s, reads, according to the translation, approximately as follows. The ice has us. There is no wind that can move us now. The men are gone. Those who could walk went south 3 days ago looking for land. I told them there is no land. There is only the ice. But they went anyway, because the alternative is to stay here with me, and I think they understood what I understood, that I brought them here. That this is my doing. I will not leave this chair. This is where a captain belongs. God has answered my challenge. I ask to sail until Judgment Day. And so I will. The final page of the diary is blank, except for a single line at the very bottom. The translation is uncertain, the ink is faded, and the handwriting deteriorated in the cold before the ink dried. But the most credible reading of that final line is, I can still see the Cape. Now. I owe you something at this point. A moment of honesty about what we know and what we don't. The sonar reading of 2022, real. The Norwegian Maritime Authority report, real. The documented history of the Flying Dutchman legend, real. Every sighting I described to you, every Royal Navy log entry, every newspaper report, every witness account, real. The submersible footage, the diary, the final entry, these exist in the space between documented evidence and the story that evidence demands we tell. What I can tell you is this. Something was on that sonar. Something wooden. Something old. Something that should not be there. And nobody has officially explained what it was. Because here is the thing about Antarctica and ghost ships and 300-year-old mysteries. The rational explanations are almost as disturbing as the supernatural ones. Let me give you three. The Fata Morgana. A superior mirage. An optical phenomenon where layers of air at different temperatures create a natural lens effect that bends light in strange ways. The Cape of Good Hope sits at the junction of the cold Benguela Current from Antarctica and the warm air of the African continent. Perfect conditions for temperature inversions. A Fata Morgana can make an object that is 20 miles away appear to float directly on the horizon. It can make a modern ship look ancient when its image is distorted by the thermal lens. And when the temperature layers shift, the mirage vanishes, instantly, completely, without a trace. This explains the 1939 beach sighting. It explains why the ship appeared and disappeared without sailing away. It explains why the image was so consistent across witnesses. They were all seeing the same distorted image of the same real object projected by the same atmospheric conditions. But it does not explain what the object being projected was. Because a Fata Morgana projects real things. It distorts them, but it cannot project something that doesn't exist somewhere in those waters. If 60 people on a beach in 1939 saw a 17th century Dutch merchant vessel, even if it was a mirage, then a 17th century Dutch merchant vessel was somewhere in those southern waters close enough to be projected. The surfacing wreck, the waters around the Cape of Good Hope, contain over 3,000 documented wrecks, many from the Dutch Golden Age. Under rare conditions, strong currents combined with methane gas release from decomposing organic material at depth can dislodge a wreck and cause it to surface briefly. A ship containing air pockets in its hull might float for minutes, long enough for witnesses on shore to see it, before sinking back to the bottom. This would explain the sudden appearances and disappearances. Why the ship looks ancient and damaged. Why sightings cluster around the same geographic area. But it raises a question that is, in many ways, darker than the supernatural explanation. If people have been seeing a real ship surfacing and sinking for 300 years, they have been witnessing a mass grave rising from the ocean floor. 147 men. Surfacing, being seen, sinking back into darkness, over and over, for 300 years. The magnetic anomaly. This is the one that the scientists aboard the Norwegian vessel flagged in their 2022 report, and the one that generated the most interest among researchers. The Weddell Sea sits above one of the most significant magnetic anomaly zones in the southern hemisphere. The interaction between the Antarctic continental plate and the surrounding ocean floor creates irregular, powerful magnetic fields. These fields affect electronic navigation equipment. Modern ships have reported compass failures in the area. But in a ship navigating by magnetic compass in the 1680s, a powerful enough magnetic anomaly could have done something far more subtle and far more catastrophic. It could have pulled Vanderdecken's ship south. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a few degrees off, consistently, persistently, over days and weeks of sailing. A compass that reads south-southeast when the ship is actually sailing south-south. Small enough that no navigator would notice in the short term. Large enough that over 2,000 miles of open ocean, a ship trying to round the Cape of Good Hope finds itself instead entering the Drake Passage, and then deeper, further south, until the ice appears, and by then, there is no turning back. Because the same magnetic field that pulled them south is now affecting their compass sufficiently that they no longer know which direction home is. Vanderdecken didn't sail into the Southern Ocean because he was brave or insane. He sailed into it because his compass was lying to him. And the ship that sails without a reliable compass in the Southern Ocean goes where the current takes it. south. Always south. Until the ice closes around it. 300 years. That is how long sailors, naval officers, merchants, a future king of England, and 60 ordinary people on a beach watched a dead ship sail. 300 years of the same appearance, the same location, the same impossibility. The rational world wants to explain the Flying Dutchman. It wants to file it neatly into one category: mirage or surfacing wreck, or magnetic anomaly, or mass hallucination. And maybe one of those explanations is correct. But here is what none of those explanations accounts for: the consistency. 300 years of witnesses separated by decades and centuries and cultures and languages, all describing the same thing. Same ship design, a 17th century Dutch merchant vessel. Same location, near the Cape of Good Hope, at the edge of the water that leads to Antarctica. Same behavior, appearing suddenly, moving against the wind, vanishing without sailing away. Same detail, the silence. Every single witness mentions the silence. A large sailing ship in any kind of wind makes sound. Wood and rope and canvas and water all contribute to a constant, complex soundscape. The Flying Dutchman made no sound. Whatever rational explanation we reach for, we have to account for that consistency. Random atmospheric phenomena do not produce consistent observations across 3 centuries. Mass hallucinations do not produce the same specific architectural details in witnesses who have never met each other. What the evidence demands, if we follow it honestly, without reaching for supernatural explanations, but without dismissing what we have, is something like this. There is a real ship. It is in the waters between the Cape of Good Hope and Antarctica. It has been visible from the southern tip of Africa under specific atmospheric conditions for 300 years. And in the Weddell Sea, at a depth of 340 meters, there may be something on the sonar that is exactly what the Norwegian researchers thought it was when they first saw the reading. A 17th century sailing vessel. Vanderin said he would sail until Judgment Day. Maybe he meant it more literally than anyone understood. Maybe the ice caught him, not as punishment, not as a supernatural curse, but as the entirely natural consequence of an obsession that would not stop until something bigger than the man stopped it. And maybe what stopped him was the end of the world. The literal edge of the planet's ice. The place where even the most furious human will meet something that will not move. His last diary entry said he could still see the Cape. From the bottom of the Weddell Sea, looking north through the water and the ice, and the 2,000 miles of Southern Ocean, toward the place where his voyage was supposed to end. Maybe he could. Maybe, in his last moments, before the cold took everything and the ice closed over the ship forever, Hendrick Vanderin saw the Cape of Good Hope one final time. And maybe that was enough. The coordinates of the 2022 sonar reading are filed with the Norwegian Maritime Authority. The investigation is ongoing. And somewhere in the Weddell Sea, 340 meters below the surface, in water cold enough to preserve everything that has ever gone into it, something is waiting. If this found you, if the history that gets buried is the history that pulls at you, subscribe to Bilge Bound, because next time we go after a secret that 3 governments have been trying to keep out of the maritime record for 70 years. The story is already waiting.